Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the development sessions. I'm Stephanie Russell. I'm the Economic Development Manager for Georgia Municipal Association and the Georgia Economic Placemaking Collaborative Program Manager. We are so excited to have you here today, and we have an excellent presentation for you. We're going to get started in just a minute. Just really quick housekeeping. If you have any questions during the session, please feel free to use our Q&A or our chat. We'll be monitoring that and passing those questions on to our host as well as our panelists. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our host, Mayor Matt Seale from the beautiful city of Ocilla, Georgia.
Thanks, Stephanie. Good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us. We've got some incredible presentations, and then we'll get into a good conversation about development-friendly codes for your cities. This is something I'm very specifically interested in as we start to do some planning for the great city of Ocilla. So I'm going to have some questions. I hope you do too. Just like Stephanie said, we'll have kind of a Q&A session at the end, but you do not have to wait until the end to put your question in the chat. So I'd encourage you, as you see the presentation, as a question comes to your mind, go ahead and put it in, and then we'll get to those in the end, as many as we possibly can. And if you do have a question that's specific to one of the presenters, one of the presentations, if you'll put that in as well. Sometimes there's general questions that I'll ask all the panelists. And sometimes if it's a specific question for just one, I'll just direct it at that one person. That'll help us make sure we get through more questions. So again, feel free to do that as the presentations are going on. But I want to introduce our panelists at this time, and we'll get to their presentations and get to our conversation. So first we have Nick Johnson. He's the senior planner with the Georgia Conservancy. Nick, you already waved. Good job. After that, presenting will be Eric Kronberg. Eric is the principal of Kronberg Urbanists. And that's just a cool word to say. So even though I'm a rural small town guy, I'm thinking of referring to myself as a rural urbanist after this presentation. So thanks for that, Eric. And then after that, we've got Ashley Youmans and Tina Garver, both from the city of Pudr Springs. Tina is the community development director, and Ashley is the assistant to the city manager. Go ahead and think of your office references there. That's our official title. We went through that just to make sure I got it right. But I want to thank all of you for joining us. We're going to start with Nick. I'm looking forward to these presentations myself. We'll just go one after the other. And again, go ahead and put your questions in the chat box as we go through it. And we're looking forward to great presentations and great conversations. So Nick, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Mayor Matt, for that introduction, and for Stephanie and the rest of the GMA team for having me. Let me get my presentations in full screen here. As Matt mentioned, my name is Nick Johnson. I'm a senior planner at the Georgia Conservancy. And in case you haven't heard about us, we are a conservation nonprofit that is keenly interested in how we use our land in Georgia, especially how our land supports our natural resources like air, water, biodiversity, etc. But of course, one of the main ways we use our land is through community development. And so what we try to do is help cities and towns across the state balance economic sustainability with environmental sustainability. We like to say that we envision a Georgia where people and the environment thrive. So that's the lens that I'll be approaching this with today, and you'll hear from others later with some really great insights as well. Just to give you a picture of where we work, we try to work all across the state because that's our mandate. But we also have a special passion for rural and small communities, of which there are many in Georgia. So if you have any questions about our work in those communities, please let me know. So when I was putting together slides for this presentation, I got really fixated on the undercard subtitle, which was Innovative Practices for Creating Development Standards. And I wanted to talk about this because I feel like innovative is a word that people get hung up on. They think that it doesn't apply to them, that they don't have some big panacea idea, some huge magic solution to making things work. So I just wanted to kind of like demystify what we mean when we say innovative or innovate, which is that in a community context, to innovate simply means that you break from tradition, that you do something different than how you were doing it before. And you'll see what I mean when Eric and Tina and the rest of the Pudr Springs team talk later. But this can be something very small. It can be something incremental. It can be a test. It can be a pilot project. It can be just something that breaks from tradition, breaks the mold of what you were doing before. So as I talk about some of the best practices for creating development standards, be thinking about a small change you could make to get started. The reason this is going to be so important is that over the next couple of decades, Georgia's cities and towns are going to face huge growth-related challenges. And it's really up to us, the planners, local government officials, developers, to find those inclusive, tailored solutions that work for our communities and increase quality of life. And when I say growth-related challenges, that's going to look different depending on where you are. One of our favorite things to talk about at Georgia Conservancy is how our land can support population growth and change. I'm sure that you all have heard about how Georgia is growing. Just to put a finer point on it, it's going to grow by 4 million people by 2040 in the next couple decades. This is a statistic from the governor's office. Just to give you a sense for what that means, Georgia has grown by 4 million people since 1980. So we're going to add the same amount of people as we did in 4 decades in the next 2 decades, half as much time. But of course, that looks different depending on where you are in the state. So you might imagine that around the Atlanta area, even in some of the more northern counties, we're going to see quite a big population boom. But the growth-related challenge facing a lot of South Georgia and Central Georgia is contraction. So communities are finding it hard to invite people or have the same amount of growth as they are seeing people leave. And that is a growth-related challenge that, that communities need to think about as well. Another one that is really affecting a lot of communities across the country, but also in Georgia, is housing, and specifically housing affordability and housing diversity. So this is just one challenge that we're facing as well. Nearly a third of American households are cost burdened, which means that they spend 30% or more of their income on housing. And that is true in Georgia as well. You can see, you can identify your own community here on this map to see what your cost burden rate is. And so as we think about what inclusive means and innovating in terms of development standards, we need to think about how that affects housing. And I'm sure that Eric is going to talk a lot more about that. We also are experiencing demographic change. Families and family makeup these days is not what it used to be. Nearly 75% of households across the country are something other than the nuclear family with 2 kids and a dog. We are singles living alone, we're roommates, and not just college-age roommates. These are older folks who are empty nesters and moving in to have some community with other folks. These are couples with no kids. So the housing solutions that we advance for who is coming to our communities and what kind of residents they want need to reflect the kinds of family makeups and arrangements that we have. And currently they don't. So across the country, our housing stock is pretty locked, it's pretty monocultural. And 90% of it almost is conventional single family neighborhood that's autocentric. It does not support walkability and stuff like that, even though people want this increasingly more. So I breezed through those to give you a sense of what we're facing in terms of what it means to create an innovative, developer-friendly code. And I want to kind of put the onus on us to take up this call and figure out how we're going to design our communities in a way that supports growth and change and sustainability and vibrancy. So this slide we like to show, it's an adaptation of a book by Adele Fleet-Bakow called Designing the City, where she really talks about how everyone is responsible for designing a city, but there are some folks who are more responsible for certain things than others. So while it is true that advocacy groups and citizens and developers in the private sector are responsible for literally building our community and filling it with things that we know and love, it's also incumbent upon us, the planners, city councils, the boards of oversight that put in place things like our zoning. They provide the skeleton that we fill with other things. And that skeleton governs things like your buildings, your streetscape, your housing stock, basically your built form that allows everything to grow within the city and change it for the better. Your economic drivers are also something that are supported by planners and economic developers and things of that, and people in those kinds of positions. And only when those two things are really strong can leadership and citizen participation really thrive. And those three things together can help you build a thriving place. So in terms of form, some of the things that we like to talk about that we encourage developers and planners to think about when they're tweaking or fixing their ordinances. The first and foremost, we talk a lot about with Kronberg Urbanists and Architects, which is support your core walkable places. What you're seeing here is a graphic from Dallas, Georgia, where we calculated that in order for, for a retail sector to be supported, they need about 4 times as many households per acre as they have today. And how are you going to get those households per acre? Well, you're going to need to innovate in terms of housing. Why are there not houses currently within a half-mile radius around the downtown? Is it something that is prevented by certain ordinances or parts of your zoning code? Is there not enough interest in developers to build it out because of those restrictions? And so these are things that as planners and city council members and things like that, we need to think about. It's really hard to get there without addressing the elephant in the room in a lot of communities, which is density. And I won't go too much into this because Eric has some great visuals and examples of how to do density right. But just know that there are ways to do it without sacrificing your character. These are examples from Georgia where dense living situations fit right into the community fabric and support community character rather than take it away from it. When you have things like density, you also embrace visual diversity. But visual diversity doesn't always have to be in the permanent structures that you create. It can be things like facade improvements. It can be pop-ups along the street. It can be what you allow in your sidewalks. It can be the kinds of artistic installations that you encourage. On the left here is a picture from Cave Spring, Georgia, which is a small town in northwest Georgia, where they have invested in the visual appeal of their small shopping district downtown, and it creates a sense of place. It's something interesting to look at, makes people want to spend time in downtown and visit the places that that are aided by this visual diversity. And I'll leave you with one more point before transitioning to the other panelists, which is that there's probably something in your town that you are not investing in that could be an asset if you give it a little love. This is Oakhurst. This is Harmony Park in Oakhurst, Decatur, which is kind of the result of a weird street grid coming to 5 different streets coming together. And they have, over time, built out a park with multiple different points of engagement. So you have things, you know, what you would expect in a park, like benches, water fountains, but they've also got a little free library here. They have a structure that's safe for kids to play on. And all of this is surrounded by retail, by restaurants and gift shops and things of that nature that, you know, are attractive for parents who might want to come and sit in the park, enjoy a drink after work and watch their kids play and give them a chance to exercise and get some of that energy out. They also fill this place with craft fairs and other artistic installations from time to time, and everything layers upon each other to create a place that is very interesting to go. But of course, this needed support from planners, from city staff, from neighborhood associations, from all those people that you saw on the other slide. But in order to do that, they had to be permitted to do it. And to give you a much less built out example, this picture is of an alleyway in Porterdale, which is a charming mill town in Newton County. And they did the same thing to a much lower degree, but it's still the same thing. City leadership looked at this alley, which was really just there to connect the parking lot behind the restaurant to the front door. And they said, you know what, we could actually make this into a really cool place. So they installed these arches, these graded arches, tables and chairs, some lighting to make it into a place that you want to hang out and enjoy the nice weather and maybe dine al fresco, essentially. But that took leadership, that took, and it took permission. It took a code that enabled that kind of thing to happen, and it took city leaders to stand up and say, you know what, we're going to do this. So all that is to say, as you hear from the other panelists, think about how you can innovate. Think about how you can change one small thing to allow for something new and exciting to come to your city or your community, and ask why don't we already have what we want, and what is stopping us from getting there? So with that, I will turn it over to Eric, who's going to talk some about the nitty-gritty behind all of this.
So before I get to talk about my stuff, I just want to point out from Nick's slides from Oakhurst, that was a parking lot where that park was. It wasn't like they had a park and they made it fancier. They got rid of a parking lot to put that in, right? What creates more value for your place, right? 4 or 5 extra parking spaces in the center of your retail district or public green space, right? That they can activate and program. And Porterdale, we looked at that mill alley, God, like 15 years ago, and I think we suggested to developer looking at it. But again, that was an alleyway for vehicle access. What creates more value for your downtown? Some outdoor dining or an extra way for cars to drive around slightly more faster and more convenient. So I just want to say that as a framing to what Nick brought up, because that's sort of a core essential of what we're talking about. Let me share my screen and then we'll dig into my stuff. So let's go desktop 1, see if I can do this right in this. Let's see if I can, there we go, in this Zoom clone. All right, so I'm going to talk about housing choice and thriving communities today. Eric Kronberg Urbanists Known. We tackle a lot of problems. We start as an architecture firm, but we do a lot of zoning and policy, urban redevelopment, a range of different buckets of services. We've had the pleasure of working with the Georgia Conservancy over the past decade on a lot of these things. And over the last several years, a lot of our brain cells have been focused on housing choice and how it fits into making healthier places. And so I'm going to jump in, move quickly, and we're going to talk a little about zoning and housing. And one of the biggest summaries we can put out there is, single family only zoning is the predominant land use in almost every American city. And because of that, or the way it operates, it perpetuates economic and racial exclusion. In America, economic exclusion by default is racial exclusion based on 100 years of segregatory policy. And if you want to question me or ask more, dig into that, we're going to share a presentation. We've done innumerable presentations. We've got a video link to a presentation we did last year that goes about an hour and a half into all of these issues in great depth. For the sake of brevity, we're not going that here. And we'd like to ask folks some kind of challenge questions. You may have not thought about single family zoning as a challenge for your community. We'll talk about that today. But it's really helpful to ask folks, how much of your town, wherever your place is, do you think is zoned exclusively and only for single family homes, right? 20%, 50%, 70%. So spoiler alert, the average American city, and we're talking about major metropolitans like in Atlanta or Minneapolis, it's over 75% of the land is zoned single family only. There's a lot of reasons this is a challenge. In smaller towns, it's usually even more, like 75 to 80%. I'm going to dig into why we have challenges and issues with that. Now, the follow-up poll question is, who on this video would love to live somewhere with little or no yard maintenance, right? Is that, if you really enjoy cutting the grass, we've got all kinds of housing choices for you. But if you want something else, we tend not to have a lot of options. Who would like to be able to walk to work, right? Instead of be stuck in traffic. Who would like to be able to walk to go out to eat, walk to the store to pick up some milk or, a cup of coffee? Are these things that are of interest to you? And if you wanted them, where would you live? Well, there's a question from Council Member Flynn about what makes a walkable neighborhood. We would say it's a neighborhood that you have some optionality to walk to. You don't have to drive everywhere for everything you need all the time. And so usually that's about a quarter mile from goods and services, whether you're a smaller town and that's your downtown, or it's a neighborhood center in a larger city. But that also means you got to have the right infrastructure of sidewalks, street trees, and other things to make it reasonable to walk there. And we tend to see this quarter mile and half mile tier as really important areas to focus on. So when I talk about housing choice and single family zoning, there's lots of your parts of your town that are just going to be what they are, and they're really hard to fix. There's other portions of your town that you can really create a lot more flywheel effect to make your downtown more thriving and more economically productive. So when we talk about how do we get here with the vast majority of our cities zoned exclusively for one use, prohibiting all others, Richard Rothstein's Color Law is the best summary. I'm not going to go through much of it here. It's an amazing book if you haven't bought it and read it yet and you're in city planning or making better places. It's critical reading. If reading isn't your thing, we've got a link to a really great Fresh Air interview with Terry Gross about it. And there's also tons of videos on YouTube. Richard Rothstein's been going around the country on the lecture circuit with great stuff talking about the books. There's a lot of ways to consume this information. So when we talk about the problem that we're seeing with this, single family only zoning is exclusionary. by its very nature, it only allows one type of use in very restrictive fashions. And it's also low variety. And what that means is you can have any kind of house you want in single family, but it's probably going to be, 2,000 to 3,000 square feet and probably 3 to 6 bedrooms, right? That's what we build in most of America. And the challenge with that is it limits housing choices, creating less flexibility for different incomes or family structures. And this is intentional, and this is legally mandated. It is by design. And so when you go back to Nick's slide from ARP, and you look at that 75% of our household structures don't necessarily need a 3 to 5 bedroom home to support their housing choices, and there's a lot of other things that may matter to them that aren't in the marketplace right now. There's a huge mismatch in terms of what we want our family structures and what we expect and what we actually provide in our cities to be successful. And so when we talk about the low variety of housing, you can pick a range of demographics, right? Recent graduates, people in grad school, maybe the crotchety old man that just wants a big old house and doesn't care. But then you've got Caesars downsizing that want to walk, and you got all kinds of family structures of single parents, full intact nuclear families. And when you look at this situation of single family only zoning, crotchety old men that don't like people, they can find a place to live. Families like housing, we've got options for that, but you don't really have effective options for everybody else on the slide. And so if you start to allow housing choice, which means, semi-attached or semi-detached dwellings, often called duplexes, which is a nasty word in a lot of jurisdictions, accessory dwelling units, granny flats, attached or detached, and even double granny flats in the backyards and even over a garage, you start to provide a range of housing options for a lot broader section of your community. And you can provide these housing options a lot closer to support goods and services in your downtowns to support those local businesses. And here's the challenge, right? If the social component isn't compelling enough for you, single family zoning costs cities a boatload of money. It's really non-productive. And what I mean by that is not the large minimum lot sizes mean less walkability, but it also means a lot higher infrastructure costs per unit of housing. And the cities generate a lot less revenue per unit of housing as well, making it much harder to meet your budgets. And so another quick graphic sequence, this is a typical 2-scale 100 by 150 lot, single family home. And what we're going to point out is, that's a lot of sidewalk, right? For 2 houses to support from a tax basis to put in. It's a lot of curbs. It's a lot of street trees if you're lucky to have them. It's a lot of utility poles, and some, municipalities in Georgia provide their own utilities. Others, it's a Georgia Power or an AMC, but you still have to provide this infrastructure, and that applies to the cost and efficiency of the service coming in. You've got traffic lights, which are a cost. You've got street lights if you're lucky, right? To keep a nice, safe environment in the evenings. But then you've got all the underground stuff, right? You got all the water lines, sewer lines, some kind of storm infrastructure perhaps, and then all the paving, which is kind of the obvious thing for the roads. This is a lot to pay for, and these 2 units of housing don't tend to generate much in the way of property taxes to pay for this stuff. But that's not really all, right? There's service needs too, right? There's police, there's fire, there's schools, there's trash, and probably more we're missing, right? And these units of housing have to generate revenues to help balance the city budget to pay for all these services. You put all that together, single family zoning in this fashion is crushingly hard to help balance the city budget. Typically, we tend to see that a single property tends to pay maybe somewhere between 1/5 and 1/3 of the property taxes they would necessarily need to pay to support the services they consume. So when you talk about subsidized housing in your town, which a lot of people rail against and hate, it's the vast majority of the single family zoning in your place, right? And we're not even talking about some of these other needs, right? Of educational funding, emergency services, after school programs, social justice funding, disaster preparedness, disaster response. And even can you imagine if there's enough wealth in a place to help provide local healthcare solutions, right? We don't have a built environment that can provide for fees for any of this because we've designed ourselves to go broke. If you don't believe me, check out the math. Urban 3 is a phenomenal group. They've got great videos that break this down, helping you analyze your place by space, right? Tax value per acre. And I'm going to go quickly through some of this stuff because I'm probably burning through my time. But again, this is a 2.9 unit per acre situation with tons of infrastructure. This alternative, when you bring in housing choice, doesn't greatly impact the physical infrastructure needed in terms of the amount of sidewalk, curbs, utility poles, or otherwise compared to this, right? That stuff is constant. Maybe you need a little more services, but man, if you can, get this kind of economic return and provide more workforce housing and the same amount of land, that's a huge win across the board just from a city budget standpoint. You know, we like to call it the super single family zoning, right? We're trying to get that to stick. It's not just single family zoning. It's got an exclamation point. It's a lot better. It's actually super. And it's a lot more inclusive for a lot of folks. And I'll go quickly. So when we talk about making our cities with housing choice more affordable, what do we mean? We mean allowing housing choice here. And housing choice allows more revenues for basic services, more workforce and attainable housing options, and more customers for downtown businesses. It typically involves things like, you know, a variety of housing type sizes on smaller lots, lot size flexibility, and you have a variety of mobility options, right? You don't require 2 parking spaces for every unit as a default, and it's here to support a variety of people, right? So this is what we're looking like. These tend to be residential code structures, not even big commercial things. And the thing is, what happens? Like, how does your place right now allow for any of this? Odds are your zoning doesn't allow for any of it, top to bottom. It's all prohibited. It's all illegal. This is what we're talking about with allowing housing choice. How do we get there? You ask your zoning and you say, wait, how do we start chipping away at this? And you don't do it everywhere because you know, you'll get unelected. You'll be forced out of office. You need to do this place in the places that it makes sense. And you start incrementally with this, and you can also do where it makes the biggest difference, right? And that's in your walkable areas with existing infrastructure. That is places with existing curb, gutter, sidewalks, on-street parking close to your downtown, right? Where you've got businesses to support that need customers, where folks can actually have a chance of walking. You don't do this in the far-flung edge of your town because it's not going to be effective. You know, this is a lot to tackle. It's a lot to process. It's a lot to get out there to your constituents to make sure they understand. We do a lot of work with Incremental Development Alliance. We've got a link to their website. There's a lot of services that they can help provide to municipalities, help understand these issues and start to look at these things in a deeper fashion. And we also partner with Georgia Conservancy a lot to help municipalities understand these things. Some of these services are looking to cities to understand how to strengthen their core neighborhoods, look at how regulations can be modified to better provide for desired outcomes. We help work with the small scale developers so that local developers and local place can do better outcomes. And also, we work at the city and state or county and state level to do provide services for these undervalued or overlooked communities that need help. So if you want your communities to be affordable, inclusive, and economically resilient, you got to start changing single family zoning. And honestly, with all this great success of job creation in Georgia, particularly the Northeast sector, we have no housing, right? We can't provide the housing in an economically viable fashion under detached, suburban sprawl developments with 4-bedroom houses and anything that people can afford with current jobs and wages. Something's got to give. Like, this is going to have to change. Thank you all very much.
All right, so I will begin our presentation, and while I'm pulling that up, I'll introduce myself. My name is Ashley Youmans. I'm with the City of Pudr Springs, the assistant to the city manager. I also have Tina Garver, our community development director, with us, and we're going to give a presentation on some of our development-friendly codes in our city. So just kind of wanted to preface this. As you can see, our tagline is inspired, invigorated, and innovative. So you heard that in some of our previous presentations so far today, using some of those words. And, I truly do believe that is what us as staff has worked towards, especially in community development efforts. And that's what our leadership has worked towards as well. So I'll begin by talking about some of our overlay districts that aid in development. So also kind of wanted to give a little bit of a background. The city has been working to revitalize our downtown area for quite a few years now. And one of these districts that the city has adopted in 2016 is the Downtown Development Overlay. It follows the same boundaries as the LCI study that we did in 2016 as well. So that follows those boundaries. And also falls in line with the recommendations of the LCI boundaries. So the benefit of having this downtown development overlay is that a developer that's interested in coming into the city doesn't have to go through the entire full zoning approval process. And instead they can go through what is called a site plan approval process that kind of helps bring that process forward a little bit. As long as they're in line with what the LCI has stated, that can help them get to development quicker. Next, we have our historic core overlay. So give a little bit of background on this. In 2002, our Downtown Development Authority adopted historic property design guidelines, which serves as an educational tool for owners and occupants and prospective owners coming into the downtown, to kind of give them some guidelines on how to design facades, choose paint, signage, streetscapes, lighting, and things like that. And in 2020, the city actually updated and expanded on that. They updated the Unified Development Code to include a historic core overlay and district. So that's what you're seeing actually in blue on the map. And what is pink is actually our CBD zoning. So as you can see, our entire CBD zoning is included within that historic core, as well as some other areas with different zoning. And what the map does is also help establish a color palette, building materials for developers, kind of all in one easy place to help them reference that. And it also allows the community development director to review and approve those designs within this boundary. So that also helps make the process go quicker. And then we also have an entertainment district that covers a portion of our central business district. And what you don't see here is what we now have is our new downtown park right in the middle in this area. It's called Thurman Springs Park. It was just finished construction actually this past September, so we're really excited about that. But basically what the entertainment district does is that it's our version of an open container district. So visitors and residents coming to our downtown, retailers and shops that serve alcohol are able to carry out an alcoholic beverage within this district, as long as it's within certain rules, such as a plastic cup and can only be one drink and things like that, that's outlined in the code. And one of the great things about this district is that it was adopted as more of a forward-thinking and planning aspect. You know, we wanted to be able to not wait for a restaurant or a brewery or something else to come in to have to adopt this. So we're adopting this more as a marketing tool in order to attract that kind of development. And this is just two examples that have taken advantage of some of these districts and overlays. They're actually two different buildings owned by the same owner. On the left, you can see it's called Rooted Trading Company. They had just recently opened up in line with our new downtown park as well. They take advantage of our entertainment district area, so they are located in that. And the great thing about it is that they've also redone a historical building in our downtown. So they are maintaining a lot of the historical aspects of it while also moving into the future and bringing in new business to the downtown. And on the right, the same owner is leasing out this building for a coffee and ice cream shop that should be coming in pretty soon. So it's pretty exciting. They're also located right directly on the park and can take advantage of that entertainment district. And this is just showing an example of the transformation that Rooted Trading Company has done. So on the left, you can see that's what it looked like on the inside before. And on the right is how the finished product has looked. So it's really cool to see how the owner has taken advantage of maintaining the historic character of the building, and as well as bringing in new ideas and a fresh look to the downtown. And with that, I will turn it over to Tina.
All right, thank you, Ashley. Yeah, I'm Tina Garver, Community Development Director with the City of Pudr Springs. And Ashley did a good job of going over some of the things that we have going on in our downtown area. The property owners in the downtown are super important, and the example that she showed with Rooted, we have conversations with those owners and we're open to those conversations. So when somebody suggests, you know, you should look at having an entertainment district, or your central business district zoning is too restrictive, we listen to those things and we're able to look and amend our code. We don't keep a set schedule for amendments to our code. We can bring them forward to our mayor and council whenever we need to. There's a public hearing process, but it still is flexible that we can bring them forward as needed. So one of the things we did looking at the Unified Development Code was making sure there's no barriers to development. We looked at central business districts specifically, and then we looked at some of our other zoning districts. So what you see here on table 2.4 on this slide are specifics, you know, minimum lot size, setbacks, and we removed those from central business district and CBD. You can see none listed down almost the whole way. Mixed use, MXU is another zoning category we have that allows residential, commercial, townhouses, apartments, allows all those type uses. And those are set by a specific site plan. So you don't have to worry about that specific site setback. We look at those things in conjunction with the fire district, but it's not laid out in zoning. We also, looking at the central business district, we were excited that it was so open to allow different types of development, but the historic character was very important, is very important. So we did go back and adopt that historic core overlay, which gives a lot of administrative approval to the community development director. That allows me to use all the tools that we've adopted over the years, the LCI study, the historic design guidelines. It allows me to look at a specific project and approve that administratively without having to go back to council, but making sure that the vision that the council has adopted is used. We also made sure that there were a number of administrative variance approvals that we could grant. So if somebody needs a parking variance or a setback variance, as long as it's within certain parameters, those can be approved administratively without going back through a full zoning process. Next slide. I want to tell a story about, we recently adopted a PUDR zoning district. And the reason why we did that is because the city was getting applications for rezoning for townhouse developments, townhouses and quadruplexes that didn't meet our zoning. So what we had was, in this example, we had somebody who wanted to do a 44-unit townhouse community, and our zoning didn't allow it. So they applied for a medium density residential, but they also had to apply for variances. They applied for variances for setback, buffers, impervious areas, and sidewalks. When that one was ultimately approved, the only variance they decided they truly needed was for impervious area. But as the engineering went through and we were in the land development process, they did find that they did need that setback variance, and it was outside the parameters for administrative approval, so they had to go through another public hearing process a few months later to get that variance for setback. A few months after that, there was still another one that they had found that needed a setback variance. Luckily, they were able to do that one administratively. So fast forward a few more months in this next development. Next slide. We had another developer come forward for a quadruplex development. At this time, as staff, we were already looking at our code going, something's not quite right. If we're going to keep getting these developments, our code's not working. And so this development was for quadruplexes. It was 104 units. This one was specific to seniors. And we looked at the code, and again, they had to apply for medium density residential zoning and a number of variances. This development needed variances for setback, right-of-way width, and lot size. So at that time, we started looking at different zoning districts. We were looking at residential senior living categories as well as PUDs. And when we brought that to our Planning and Zoning Commission, they didn't want to limit to just seniors because they felt that our comprehensive plan calls on us to diversify our housing stock, and we shouldn't limit that to just seniors. So talking to the developer, the zoning attorney at the time, anybody, other governments, we did decide to go forward with a PUDR zoning category. And that PUDR zoning category was adopted in April of 2019. This developer that was with us during that process ended up expanding their project, and they purchased additional property and had to go back through zoning. But at this time, we had the PUDR zoning in place, and they chose to apply for that PUDR zoning category for the entire site rather than pursue the MDR and the variances again. We've had a lot of success in talking to our developers about the PUDR category. In this past year, we had 2 applications come before the city. This one was 73 units. This one is a typical single-family neighborhood, but because of the lot size and they wanted flexibility in the site plan, they did choose to do the PUDR zoning. They made it all the way through the development process. It's currently under development, and they did not need to come back and apply for any variances. This next development that we had come through, it also had an annexation component. It's called Tap Farm. This one had a variety of uses. It's single family cottage and townhouse development. The Planning and Zoning Commission had asked the developer to diversify and add some additional townhouses, and that's what they had done. One thing we learned in this process, though, when they came through the LDP process, that there were a handful of things that weren't matching up. We had originally adopted the PUD to say if there's a conflict between the UDC and the PUD, the UDC governs, because we really wanted the developer to put out all those variances or differences that they were asking for up front. But what we found were there were things that weren't matching up that were minor, that were still consistent with the plan that we wanted to be able to approve administratively. So we brought that back to our council, and council amended our code to say that administrative variances are allowed, and we were able to approve those administrative variances before this LDP was issued. This is the amendment that I was just talking about. We adopted this just recently, October 2020. So we feel that our code is always a learning process. There's always ways to make things better. And what this calls out is if there is a conflict in our PUDR or MXU site plan, as long as it meets the intent and the vision of that site plan, we are able to approve that administratively. We did say it can't conflict with safety or floodplain management requirements because we're not going to vary that administratively. We also have guidelines regarding site plan revisions. As long as it doesn't do anything major, reduce a buffer to an adjacent property owner or change the access point, those are able to be done administratively as well. This is our online interactive map that shows all of our zoning categories. We have those other districts that Ashley mentioned up here as well. This green category is the PUDR that we've adopted. And you can see that there's 3, it's like a dark green color, PUDRs that we've recently adopted. And then there's a new development coming in the next month or so that I believe will come in as a PUDR as well. So since we've adopted that ordinance, that is the zoning category that the developers are choosing. Thank you so much for having us speak. That is all I have to share with you guys today, and I'll turn the program back over to Mayor Seale.
Thanks, Tina, and thanks everybody. I got a lot of great information on that. I've got plenty of questions, some of which I'm going to ask, some of which I'll probably follow up with you guys later because they're very specific to me. And for everybody else, go ahead and there's a couple questions that came in that we had to work with, but if there's other questions from the audience there, go ahead and put them in either the chat or the Q&A. There's actually 2 different places to put it in. I want to start, and I started just jotting down a note, Nick, during your presentation, but Eric, you spoke to it as well. And there was a question about walkability. Nick, I saw you already answered it in the Q&A, but for everybody else that may not have seen that, and also because we're recording to make sure anyone who sees this later. So I guess because I know you kind of have like this half-mile thing, but then also, and I forget which one of you said something about walkability is also dependent upon, do you have the sidewalks? Do you have the infrastructure that kind of makes that easier? So kind of speak to what that is, and I'll throw this kind of curveball in there. Another thing I noticed in both of y'all's presentations was there's a central district, and in Pudr Springs, you're talking about a central business district. What are the, I guess, pros and cons? In Ocilla, we've got a very small downtown. We're thinking about doing what would essentially be a little bit of commercial development somewhere other than downtown. And so now I've got, instead of one kind of bigger hub, I might have smaller areas. Maybe that's spreading things out resource-wise. I need to kind of think about things like that. But that might add to my walkability because now I've got two center points, essentially. So I know I threw a lot of stuff at you there. Oh.
I would say, I'm saying no, don't do it.
Don't do it. Okay, Eric says
well,
no.
Well, Nick, I'll jump in and I'll try to leave some space for you too. But here's what I'd say. You want to know what a walkable neighborhood is? It's something built before 1929. We in America haven't built walkable neighborhoods since the crash, since the Great Depression. Full stop. We don't know how to do it. We've legislated crappy engineering standards, crappy road standards, and anything new, the odds it's going to be walkable is exceedingly low, even if you put up like a apology sidewalk on the edge by the curb, right next to the 6-lane road. Like, we don't build walkable places anymore functionally. So go to your town, find your Sanborn maps, see what was built by 1929. Those are the areas where walkability exists, right? It's that effing simple. And then if you want to figure out how to have commercial thrive and figure out how to have, that means that you can't have typical parking requirements that mean that 2/3 of your lot's a parking lot and the rest is a tiny store, because there's no economic productivity of that. There's no walkability, there's nothing else. So if you talk about a new commercial zone on the edge of town, it's gonna be drive only because your regulations require it. And there's no practical way to walk to it, right? I can guarantee that. I don't know your town, but I know that's gonna be the case. Like, if you want walkable and you want economically productive, you need to reinforce the assets you have. That's not to say that you shouldn't be building in other places where there's stuff to do. You don't want, the industrial warehouse in your downtown necessarily. You need goods and services, right? So different uses, different places. we're talking about goods and services. Build on strength. Don't dilute your strength by trying to put some stuff over on the edge of wherever.
It's actually kind of interesting. I'd love to show it to you because I think it might be, I take your point, but it might be slightly different because it's not on the
yeah.
Nick, go ahead.
I'll reinforce what Eric said. We have a lot of quippy witticisms at Georgia Conservancy that I'm sure we've cribbed from other people. Two of them are, we can learn from our history, and the most sustainable communities are the ones that are already built. So just to reinforce what Eric is saying, that like we did walkability really well before the Great Depression, in terms of, and also I should point out that a lot of the things that we advocate for now as planners, like a mix of uses, bringing people back to downtown, were things that we used to be against because of all of the racial exclusion that we promoted back between the Great Depression and the Civil Rights Act and beyond, if you read The Color of Law. So one of the things that we try to emphasize when we go and say, look, you got away from this pattern of walkability, how do you get it back? Is what Eric said about quarter mile, half mile. When you're looking at places to site new housing and do housing infill and maybe change, which might require some zoning changes, where are the things that people need to get to and how can they get to them? And once you start answering that question, all of the other contingencies kind of start to come up and you can peel away at them one by one. One of them is parking, one of them is sidewalks. I think I mentioned in the example there that there are a lot of urban design principles that have to be considered too, like the opportunity to turn corners, small lots and blocks and streets, things that you want to feel safe in a walkable neighborhood. You don't want to have wide roads with multiple lanes, or even in suburban communities. I mean, those roads don't exactly foster slow speeds, even though you can put speed humps and all these things to do it. So when we're thinking about walkability, how to create that from places that are not walkable, you really got to start peeling away at the tenets of single family zoning.
Eric, you actually asked a question of Tina. Tina looks like she just responded, but go ahead and kind of give it a little back and forth. You guys have mentioned parking anyway, and just your answer there, but what was your specific question about that?
Well, I mean, like if you want to talk about innovative solutions for, and I'm talking specifically for a central business district for these smaller towns, like if you want your central business district to thrive, it's really helpful to look at the regulations that were in place when it was founded, when it was built, and when it did well, right? Not very, very thin regulations. And so I just challenge any city that's trying to be innovative with the central business district. For that district, why in the heck are you requiring any parking whatsoever from the private development, when that typically requires tearing down of existing buildings to put a parking lot in to support the zoning requirement? Like, and I get that you vary, but why do you even have that as a requirement?
So you're saying just maybe you not even have parking as a requirement at all, and you're...
No, and again, that's very different to say that which the government should legally mandate private development should do versus letting private development figure out what's best for itself.
Size it up and actually make the decision based on the market, the commercial atmosphere, those kinds of things.
Exactly. Particularly when that's one of the biggest barriers to getting innovative and helpful uses in your downtown to make it thrive is going to be the parking requirement.
I wanted to, something else that was in, and Eric, this was a little more in yours. You were talking about the, I think you gave a statistic there that in most cities, 75% is zoned for single family only. So where's the balance there? And Ashley and Tina, when you guys are doing some of your developments, how do you guys figure out, because how much lower than 75% before maybe you've got too much density? And I know that's going to vary community to community a little bit, but are there some kind of basic rules of thumb for things that just work practically?
You know, some of the, I understand the question, and I'll turn over to Tina and Ashley in a second, but I also don't know that that's the right question to be asking, right? I think the right question to be asking is, are you able to provide housing at the cost to support your citizens, right? And are you able to support that in a place that allows some of your residents to not have to own a car or to use a car for all their trips, right? Those are questions to ask, right? We've got the jobs in Georgia, or at least in the north half of the state, right? But you know, I was impressed. I was with ECG doing a presentation, and I think it was Jackson, Georgia, one of the small towns. You know, a couple thousand people, 1,500 or so. You know, they had 3 second-story apartments being renovated on their main street, and they had a waiting list of like 50 people long. And this was in a small town with no growth, right? The demand for housing choice is still critical. And so I would say if you're meeting the demand for housing at an affordability level and a walkability level that meets the needs of your citizens, you're doing great. I don't know a single city in America that is doing that.
So not so much the let's shoot for a certain number. It's going to vary case by case, and there may be like I live in a single family house. I'm 3 blocks from City Hall. I walk to work every day, unless it's just terrible weather. I got to carry something heavy I put in my car.
Right.
So I'm already there. I'm actually looking to do some more, increase the density closer to downtown to provide more places. Right. That's something we're doing. We're a GIT community. We're in we just finished our first year of a 3-year program. So, but I was looking for, hey, is there a number I should be shooting for? And you're saying, I don't pay so much attention to the number. It's just that the number is way out of whack in most cities now because of the circumstances. From
a housing demand and affordability standpoint, we've got more, I think we have enough detached single family housing stock existing in America to last the market demands for the next 30 years, right? If we don't build another single family detached house, right? In terms of rent or cost size, otherwise, we are so underserved by housing choice for attached, smaller, walkable units that if everything we built was just that kind of flexible housing approach for the next 30 years, we're still about a decade behind, right? If the orders of magnitude are so massive that trying to worry that you've made your town really amazing and walkable with a thriving Main Street, and that you've done it too much and you've made it too great a place to live, that's sort of what you're asking here.
Right. Okay. All right. Ashley and Tina, I'll go to you guys because you talked about how obviously you've had to change things and allow for increased density. So what are the conversations that you're having there? And actually, I'll even push that into the next question. I was going to ask specifically you guys. How have you done community engagement? Because you've got one case where you're doing something early with the entertainment district to invite some industry. In the other case, you finally changed some codes more permanently instead of keep allowing variances. So in one way you're leaning forward and one way you're reacting. And how did you do the community engagement on both sides of that? I know I just threw a lot at you too. I have a tendency to do that.
I'll start with the housing piece of it. So the housing that we've been, that is coming to us right now, the developers that are coming to ask for the redevelopment, our townhouses really were the main thing. So we are probably more than 75% single family, closer to 80%. And we started off saying, we don't want to allow any rezonings from commercial to residential because we don't need more single family. The developers are coming to us now with the townhouses, and that was a big difference in density for our mayor and council, and they were able to be comfortable with that townhouse development. Now we have some quadruplexes coming in, and they seem comfortable with that. Over time, the minimum lot size hasn't been a concern anymore, so they've gotten away from that. Apartments have been a really scary word for many years, and I think we're overcoming that now. We have some senior apartments in the city, but I think we would be open to something in the downtown area or maybe even in other areas of the city that we've selected that might be ideal for that use. So a lot of it's just been progressive and, opening your mind to different things and seeing good developments come out that aren't scary. We have a brand new development in our downtown with townhouses and people aren't scared of them and they're pretty dense. So I think it's a lot of gradual making way.
And I'll add on to what Tina said. She said it is gradual. It is a continual work in progress for us. And I think as far as community engagement goes, related to that is just keeping the community educated and also maintaining that same mindset. Even if we're just discussing it in a city council meeting, saying we're doing this because we've been through these planning processes and this is what the residents have said that they wanted, and this is the work that we've done related to that. So it's more of maintaining the same message throughout all of our city council meetings and anytime we may have an open house or a town hall or something like that.
I want to reiterate that. I think that's really the best approach, doing it incrementally. A small change here, a project gets built, document that nobody died, right? That nobody died, there's no great trauma to the city, and actually the place got a little bit better, right? And you build on those successes, and trying to bite off too much as a politician or as a planner can create a lot of blowback because there's so much education on the public side that's necessary, and also for city council who's getting the angry phone calls of why are we doing this or not. So having the shared vision, which Georgia Conservancy can really help with, right? Of this is how our city is going to be a thriving, inclusive, great place. These are the things we need to do. These are how these small changes help build us towards that end goal we all agreed is critical for our place. Helps. These big wholesale changes tend to get watered down and be politically fraught and hard. So pick the low-hanging fruit and make it incrementally better and incrementally better. Such a good way to do it.
That was the best possible segue you could have given me for my final wrap-up question to go around everybody. Nick, you actually said this in your presentation, the same kind of thing about find some small steps, some small innovative things you can do. So for Ashley and Tina, would love to hear some of the smallest yet most impactful things that, and maybe this is, you have to go back. You guys are so far along now, you're not doing small anymore, but you had to start somewhere. So talk about some of the things, just some quick examples. And then Nick and Eric, you guys have had experiences in so many different places in Georgia and probably elsewhere too. What are some examples? So inspire us, inspire me. I'm in a small resource-strapped town, population 3,400. We're trying to get some things going, and we know we have to start small. But what are some great, small but impactful things we can do to start building that momentum? Nick, I'll start with you. We'll go in the same order we did the presentation.
You caught me. I was trying to look up a quick fact about Millen, Georgia. I'm going to cite an example about Millen because I don't know what their population is. This is not something that we were directly involved with, but it really inspired me. So I hope it inspires you too. I think one of the things that we try to emphasize is that the community education piece, as Ashley was saying, is so important. But one thing that can help you with that is finding a local champion that really sees things how you do. In Millen, they found that. They had a guy who was, I forget if he was either born there or he came back or something, where he saw the potential that their main street and their railroad depot street could be and was like, you know what? I'm going to lead by example here. I'm going to invest in a housing renovation project so that we can put some units downtown. And if you help me find some of the funding, we'll do it together. And I don't know at what stage they are, but I remember it being like a really inspirational partnership that ended up carrying over into more projects. And suddenly Millen had like 8 new units downtown that they could draw from, and probably had a waiting list similar to what Eric described happening in Jackson. But you know, it's those kinds of things that can really start to change a community. And once the momentum is built, you can build on that success.
You can change a whole city block by starting with just one property. Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
Eric?
Yeah, really quick. One of the things I would say too is obviously we got a ton of cities and counties in Georgia, and some cities are a lot further ahead than others across scales. And so there's peer cities that you can reach out and you should be talking to. Hey, what did you guys do to get started? Or what's really working for you? But that's also an example for your constituents. Hey, look, Millen, they did these things. They've got a great downtown. Nobody died, right? Maybe we could try a little bit of this stuff to see if we can catch some of that magic, right? When you understand that our built environment regulations are at best a train wreck and a travesty, like it provides more room to try to get those right sides to make a better place. If you think that somehow they're handed down from on high by some really smart folks, like if you're scared of change, they're like segregatory, racist, scared, resultant. They're just horrid, right? So these rules that regulate your place are that bad. So it helps turn your perspective to realize that, and should encourage you to go talk to other places that are starting to tweak these things to make their places better. So you don't have to do it all on your own.
All right.
I'll go ahead with one of our examples, and I'll let Tina add anything else. So I guess what I would say, an example of starting small in the city of Pudr Springs. So our DDA was formed actually quite a while ago, but for a long time there, they weren't really as active as they could have been. But they were kind of reinvigorated at around 2014, getting them more involved in, how can we actually, what strategies can we use our DDA to help revitalize our downtown, because this has been in our planning documents since the 90s, but we would like to see action from them. So that's something I would recommend, is look at the kind of authorities or tools or things that you have in place that are underutilized, and specifically to the DDA, not just, I guess, making sure and trying to seek out volunteers that can help and with the backgrounds that would be beneficial to your downtown. So people with a background in development or small business or things like that, and having a diversity on that board.
Yep, I was going to mirror something similar to what Ashley just said. We had the downtown was in our plans for many, many, many years, and we had an LCI study, and then we did a new LCI study around 2014, 2015. And that kind of, it brought the current crowd to the table. There were a lot of people that were saying, one of the small business owners said to me, I'm not going to this LCI meeting because you guys are always talking and nothing's going to change. Well, surprise, things did change this time around. We did follow through on some of those plans. And it wasn't easy. I mean, there were some horrible town hall meetings and getting people on board, but now the people are at the table. And, you know, some things we revised to go in a different direction to meet that the crowd's request. Some things haven't, but, you know, the right people are involved again. So I think that's good. Just looking at your studies and just don't rely on all your old stuff.
All right, well, that's all the time we have. I want to thank all four of you for joining us. I got personally something out of all the presentations and the Q&A, so thanks very much. I'm going to pass it back to Stephanie. And Stephanie, I'm sure you saw it, but I know folks want to know where they can get their hands on those slides and where this recording of this presentation will be once we're done here. So Stephanie, back to you.
Yeah, we will have this presentation available on the Georgia Cities Foundation website, and that's georgiacitiesfoundation.org. And should have that up no later than Friday. Also wanted to remind you that our next development sessions will be on February the 9th at 3 o'clock, and it will be a session on the state of rural broadband in Georgia. You do not want to miss this one. We have a lot of our state leaders participating in this, as well as our executive director, Larry Hansen. So we're really excited about the series this year, and we're hoping to put one out once a month for you. If you have a topic or you would like to participate, please do not hesitate to reach out to me, and we'll chat and possibly get you booked. I want to say thank you again to our panelists, and they did an excellent job. Once again, this presentation will be available on georgiacitiesfoundation.org website, and everyone have a great day. Thank you.